What's up, Broncos? Future Nick here, coming live from when we know that Joe Biden has actually won the presidency. Just wanted to hop in to provide some context to you guys that the discussion you're about to hear all happened on November 5th, so please keep in mind that we didn't have all the answers going into it. It was kind of a crazy Thursday. That being said, we still thought these were awesome discussions with some really great guests, and we hope that you guys enjoyed as much as we enjoyed having them. This is going to be one part of a three-part election special, so if you enjoyed this, please make sure you check out the other two. And with that being said, Broncos, enjoy.
And moving on to our next segment, he is the vice president of the Cal Poly Pomona Political Science Club. She is the secretary of the CPP Political Science Club, and they were previous guests here on the show giving us their valuable insight and predictions leading up to Election Day. We are happy to welcome back to the program for their thoughts on everything that has happened since Election Day, Thomas Swanson and Emely Vanegas.
Thank you guys so much for coming back. We really appreciate having you on.
Thank you for welcoming us back.
Absolutely. Had to bring you back, especially after our prediction video. I really wanted to talk to you guys and just have like a deeper conversation about like what do we think has happened since and what are some, more predictions about where we can kind of see things going given the information we have. And just kind of how we stipulated at the top of the episode for everybody, all the information is coming in right now. We're only working with what we know as of today, November 5th. So please just keep that in mind that things can change just based on new information by the time this comes out. But with all that being said, Emely and Thomas, last time we had you guys on, you gave your predictions about how you thought that things were going to go. And this is actually something we've been touching on throughout the entire episode with our other guests, that you guys aren't alone in your kind of predictions and some assumptions that we had given the polling data, given kind of how trends were going. So in light of that, I think it's safe to say things haven't gone as a lot of people have thought. You guys' predictions didn't really pan out as you had expected before. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what do you think happened that kind of accounted for these changes and how you thought things were going to go.
Yeah, I'll go first if Thomas doesn't mind. So, when we last talked last week, I was pretty optimistic. I will admit when the night began that Tuesday night, I felt very downtrodden. I felt overwhelmed. I felt like a bunch of emotions that, like I was like, oh my gosh, is this going to be 2016 2.0? But then I often reflected back to what one of my professors, my professor Scarcelli, said to me that, it's not going to be an easy ride. Like, go into it emotionally and mentally prepared that, you're going to be waiting for these results for a few days, given the amount of people voting, given the new circumstances and everything. And, so I felt like Professor Scarcelli called it to almost a T. He said there's going to be a red mirage the first days. Or the first night, it's going to seem like Trump is in the lead, it's going to seem that it's Biden's not going to take it. But then, as people start counting in those mail-in ballots, as you start noticing other things happening, coming into play, that it's eventually going to start to flip. And, that's exactly what we saw. Though I will say the disappointing outcome was definitely the Senate. I know a lot of people, in particularly, we're hoping for that blue wave, for that, Senate to finally be flipped into the Democrats' court. And, that didn't happen. And so people are wondering why. There was a lot of momentum going into this. There's a lot of numbers in the polls saying that, yes, these Democratic, senator hopefuls are going to flip seats, and it just didn't happen. And I think, a lot of that comes down to just as much as people thought Biden or Trump motivated, other people to vote against him, he motivated his own constituents to vote for him, so it's just been a difficult time to see, everything happen. The Senate, like I said, didn't flip. Democrats even lost a few seats in the House, but you still saw a bunch of key players return, like AOC, and then, the entire squad. And all of them. And then we even made some leeway with the first openly transgendered representative being elected, then, other openly gay or LGBT members. And so that's been very good to see. But like I said, it's been kind of sad to see that, that blue wave everyone was hoping for didn't really pan out. And, that again can be attributed to the polls, like the polls like in 2016 gave Hillary Clinton a very clear shot of winning, and that didn't happen. And just like this time, it gave a very clear indication that, something, this blue wave would hit, and it just didn't happen. Yeah, so I don't know if Thomas wants to add anything.
Yeah, I guess for me, it was just a disaster for the Democratic and supposedly opposition party. We've lost now 7 and counting seats in the House. We failed to retake the Senate. And supposedly the one person that we were sold as capable of beating Donald Trump, the most electable person, Joe Biden, we're struggling with the state of Nevada and all these other swing states. And we're still anxious on who's actually going to come out on top, although I am confident that Joe Biden will take the state of Nevada and possibly Georgia. But I think it's a really disappointing turnout. We had 4 years of President Trump administration, and the Democratic Party failed to show voters and connect the economic, social pain that they're feeling to the administration that was in charge. And I think to Emely's point, Donald Trump turned out people that wanted to vote for him. He excited his base. And I would struggle to outline or articulate what Joe Biden was actually running on. He failed, I think, to give voters an affirmative reason to vote for him, other than the fact that he was not President Trump. And there's a lot of reason. That motivated a lot of people to vote for Joe Biden. But again, I think policy matters. And a lot of the Democrats, propped up by hundreds of millions of dollars, especially in the Senate races. Jamie Harrison raised $100 million, couldn't defeat Lindsey Graham. Sarah Gideon and Maine raised $70 million and couldn't defeat Susan Collins. And in Kentucky, one of the most unpopular senator in the entire United States Senate couldn't be defeated by Amy McGrath with $100 million behind her and $20 million in the primary. So I think it really calls into question the effectiveness of Democratic leadership in providing an affirmative message that will motivate people to go to the polls instead of just, we are not the Republicans, which again does motivate people, and it is a good strategy, a return to normalcy. But we've lost a lot of our base, as we're seeing in the exit polls, or we left some of them behind or didn't take it seriously enough to go after them and keep them as part of our Democratic coalition.
Wow, I couldn't have said it better myself. I completely agree with both of you. It is interesting at the top of the show with speaking with one of our earlier guests, we had talked about how, was it a repudiation on Trump as like the man individually, or was this a repudiation on just Trumpism overall in the administration? I think the conclusion we kind of came to was if this election showed us anything, is that people don't like Trump, the man, but Trumpism, the Republican Party as altered by Trump and the administration, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed with them. And I couldn't agree with you more, Thomas, on this has been, if you're a Democrat, if you are looking at this and was hopeful that the Democrats, the supposed opposition party, would be able to connect all the grievances of the, disastrous economy, the failed response to coronavirus, and the civil unrest, that they were supposed to connect that to the Republicans, and they failed. This is an abject failure, I feel like, on Democrats across the board. Even though I agree with you, I believe that Joe Biden will eke out a win. I do think that he has enough path forward electorally to win, even if it's just barely. But that just kind of speaks to the absurdity of the situation where a sitting president, again, separating how you feel about Trump and Biden individually, just the fact that this is a sitting president over a crashed economy, a failed response to a pandemic, and civil unrest, and that the race is this close, I think is an abject failure. Even if Joe Biden wins, the fact that Democrats have lost ground in the House and failed to reclaim the Senate has just shown, if anything, the only repudiation so far has been on the Democrats and on this message of, just like you said, a lack of policy, a lack of substance, of running on the soul of the nation. That's something we talked about before with Dr. Guerrero. Like, what does that even mean? These platitudes mean nothing. These don't connect with voters clearly. So I completely agree with you.
Nick, I think that's a great I think that's a great point that you made, and I'm glad you were finally able to make it now that we have this more open-ended discussion, and it's more of a conversation as opposed to an interview. I think that's a really great point that you made. I said this off the air, but I'm going to say it again because it made Nick laugh pretty hard. But the term democratic strategist is an oxymoron at this point in time. I don't think, and again, this is from being as objective as I possibly can be at this point. Again, like, we have all this crazy news coming in every 5 minutes, so it's a little bit hard to be objective right now, but at the same time, being as objective as I can, I've always said, and this, I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying, but like, you see the people that are out there just acting incredibly crazy, like the guy that had what was the shirt that he had on?
Barbecue freedom and like
beer, barbecue, and freedom, and goes behind he goes behind the guy who's talking, and he's like screaming about all this stuff. I even said this in 2016 when people were, like freaking out and everything. I always say, like, your candidate is not your personality. Like, your candidate is not a personality trait. And I would say this to people who are freaking out over any candidate, in terms of, like, obviously everyone's seen the guy that was screaming yesterday. That's not acceptable. In the same way that your candidate is not a personality trait, not being Donald Trump is not a strategy. Exactly. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's your base level, what you're running on. You need to build off of that. You can't just say, I'm not Donald Trump, I'll be fine. You have to have some sort of substantive plan.
Sorry, Emily.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, and I could just speaking to more of that, we have two issues that are very clear to me, that Democrats could have seized on, that aren't far left issues. We need to decriminalize drugs in this country and end the war on drugs. We saw in Arizona, North Dakota, New Jersey, voters passed legalization of recreational marijuana. And in Florida, a state that voted for Donald Trump, voted to increase its minimum wage to $15 an hour. So we understand, and I think Democrats need to actually take these issues. I know it's scary, and I know that it's contrary to what law enforcement might object to, but these are issues that are very clear, and they're to voters, and they're issues that motivate voters to go to the polls and excite them. So I think that if there are very clear opportunities for Democrats to seize on these very bread and butter issues, things that are easy for people to understand. People haven't had a wage rage in this country for about 20 years. Especially people of color, but all people have been locked up for the past 30 years for low-level, nonviolent drug offenses. These are very easy issues that have touched many people's lives, and that are easy for voters to understand and would motivate them to turn out.
They're
so
also
if we're
popular.
interested in turning out our base, we need to seize on these issues that are so important to our base and have touched so many of their lives.
Yeah, I think kind of like going off of that, the Democrats are really trying to play this like centrist like role, like they're trying to like appease like a bunch of like super right-leaning people instead of really trying to motivate their own base and trying to like show their own base, like, hey, if you elect us, we can do this, this, and this, or like stuff, or, pass policies that people obviously care about. Like Thomas said, the decriminalization of drugs, the raising the minimum wage. If you talk to people without, in a nonpartisan way, and you come to them saying, hey, would you like a raise in like how much, you're making? A lot of them would say yes, and these aren't policies that, shouldn't be too crazy to like motivate people. But, the Democrats, like everyone has mentioned here, has been running on the fact that we're not Donald Trump. We're not going to, antagonize people the way he has. We're not going to talk about people the way he has. And, it isn't a winning strategy. And like everyone's been talking about, the fact that the race is this close, the fact that, states that people projected would flip blue haven't, because, it's just been that close of a race. It's really disappointing on behalf of the Democrats. You really expected them to kind of like motivate more people, but they haven't. And, that's been kind of a problem that they've had for a long time, even since Hillary Clinton, because, they elected Hillary Clinton because they picked Hillary Clinton because she was the more, at the time, electable candidate. And look at what happened, you know?
Well, the thing is I don't think either Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden are as electable as people pretend that they are. I get they're part of an establishment, but look who's in the White House right now. He's in there because he wasn't a part of the establishment. I'm not saying we need a Democratic version of Donald Trump. What I'm saying is we need a Democrat candidate. The Democrats need a candidate, if they want to win, that can actually get people excited, that can actually bring something new to the table, then that can actually hold their own in these policy discussions and everything like that. Because a lot of the times, you know, regardless of if you're a Trump or Biden fan, regardless, in these debates and in a lot of these forums that Biden has participated in and that Hillary participated in too, it always came down to, well, look how bad Donald Trump is.
Yeah.
You know, you're seriously going to vote for that guy? Well, the answer is yes. A lot of people are going to vote for that guy. So you're not going to convince the people that have already decided. What you have to do is you have to prove that you are the better candidate. And and what I'm saying is, instead of tearing that candidate down, and I'm not saying this is part of we need more civility in politics, because that's out the window at this point. But like, instead of tearing down Donald Trump, which he will do on his own, you need to build yourself up and build your own case. And by the way, I just want to say my past thing when I said your candidate is not your personality trait. I did not mean don't be passionate. I did not mean don't be passionate about candidate. I'm not sure if I articulated exactly what I was saying. Be passionate about your candidate.
No, yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, a lot of people have come to view, you know, the Donald Trump, you know, voter base as kind of like a cult, because, you know, he could do nothing wrong, he could say nothing wrong, and, you know, there's nothing wrong with being passionate about your candidate. If you really believe wholeheartedly for what he's saying, you know, and you believe in the policies that he's trying to implement, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes down to the fact that, you know, he's doing things, he's been charged with things that aren't, you know, legal, and you're still like, yeah, he's my guy, you know, like, that's probably where you need to like reevaluate yourself and reevaluate what you stand for, and, you know, what it is you want for, you know, the nation, and what you want for your neighbors. And I think a lot of this has come down to, you know, people's lack of empathy, or, you know, people's lack of like, or people becoming more jaded, in my personal opinion. Like, people, you know, hear like, I don't want raised taxes, I don't want to have to do that, you know, why should I pay for someone else's, like, you know, way of living? It's like, because some people don't have the same opportunities as you. You know, it's not about, you know, it's equity versus equality, the collectivism versus the individual. And, you know, the United States really prides itself on being individualistic, but sometimes we need to think about, you know, the greater good for the community. And, you know, Donald Trump has kind of, you know, shown that it's kind of hard to articulate without sounding like too harsh on them, but, you know, it kind of comes down to, if you're a Trump supporter and you're still okay with everything that has happened in the past 4 years, maybe it's time to reevaluate what it is you stand for, you know, what it is you want for your neighbors and for yourself. But that's just my take.
And yeah, no, I hear you. And I want to bring Thomas back in on this, and I want to shift the conversation kind of back to policy, and kind of nail on this point, because as you were mentioning earlier, and we've talked about this throughout the show with our multiple guests, we've talked to them about the kind of almost ironic nature of like, policies, a lot of the time progressive policies, not translating directly into support for Biden. You know, the perfect example that you mentioned, Thomas, of Florida passing a $15 minimum wage, yet overwhelmingly going to Trump. And I think what that shows, and you had alluded to this, Emily, is that these are fundamentally progressive ideas. Let's not get it twisted, right? These are progressive ideas, but they speak to people's material conditions. And this is something that we touched on with Dr. Guerrero previously, is that both parties are ostensibly captured by corporate interests, and they haven't represented people on either side. They haven't represented working people specifically in a long time. And people are starting to internalize that. Now that manifests in different ways. That manifests in people like the Trump voters who believe that he is, you know, in their corner, especially in 2016. That translates to a lot of people being apathetic and checking out completely, you know? So I think that one of the biggest takeaways that I hope, and we can actually get into this, the thing that I hope both parties take away, but especially the Democrats, is that you need to start speaking policy and more specifically to people's material interests. Because just like you alluded to, Emily, you can present these things disconnected from Democrats. Like, I promise you, it might not have had as much support had it come out with a Democrat, because people are so, kind of stuck in their kind of partisan worldview. But you can convince a hardcore Trumper to support, progressive policy. You can convince them to support something like a $15 minimum wage. You can convince them to support something like switching over to environmentally friendly manufacturing job, because you're giving them something to vote for. You're giving them an option. And I think that's very important to hit on. And Thomas, I want to get your take on this further of, do you think, and I'll kind of give this out to the entire panel, but do you think that the results of this election, do you think that the Democrats and Republicans, but specifically the Democrats, do you think they're going to reflect on this and move in that direction to actually address material policy?
I don't think that they are. What I see coming out of the Democratic Party, especially return to brunch liberals, is a lot of vote shaming, and I think we need to be clear on this podcast. 62 million people chose what is objectively a sociopath. Whatever reason that they chose that person, if we want to win elections in the future, we're going to need to bring some of them over. And we, again, speaking to this issue of connecting policy to either party, the Democrats have abdicated that position of these left-leaning policies. And I think that speaking more to the point of electability, regardless of whether we nominated Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, they were going to call him a socialist anyways. Democrats will forever be socialist when they're running against us. That's the culture war issue. But again, people are never going to believe that a Democrat is more good at being a Republican or a moderate conservative than a Republican is. They just aren't. They see through that. And we see candidates like Amy McGrath excusing some of Trump's policies, tying herself to Trump, Sarah Gideon kind of trying to moderate their message. It fundamentally makes you look dishonest. We need you to take a position. We need to understand what you stand for and what you're fighting for. People need to believe that you're going to fight for them, not that you're going to Washington to somehow appease or use political gamesmanship to get some tiny concession from the Republicans. They're not using it. And we see this in primaries within the Democratic Party, specifically Jamal Bowman beating 32-year incumbent Elliot Engel. People don't respect and don't see kind of the seniority that people are selling. That if you're a senior member in the House and you get to sit on the top of all these committees, that somehow that translates into a greater material well-being for your constituents. People just don't buy that anymore. The people that are succeeding in organizing and beating back big money, because that's the world we live in now. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez fended off a Republican challenger. They spent $10 million sending about 750,000 pieces of paper mail into her district, and she beat him by 40 points. So we need to understand that there is a path forward for Democrats, but we need to carve out what is an authentic Democratic platform and not have at the center of it these kind of return to normalcy. We're not Republicans, but maybe we're going to work with Republicans when we get there. This kind of return to normalcy that wasn't actually really good for a lot of people. People like harken back, when John McCain and Bill Clinton worked to pass the crime bill, that was the best time ever. And people just really don't fundamentally believe that. That wasn't a good time for Americans, and it didn't produce any policy that actually improved their lives. We saw the deregulation of banks that went to create that 2008 economic crisis. We see the 92 crime bill passed, which we see our prisons are filled up with all of these people. People do not want a return to whatever was considered normal 20 years ago. And we need to carve out a positive, affirmative vision with a $15 minimum wage, decriminalizing drug use, passing conscious, common sense gun control, all of these issues, we just need to take a stance and make it clear to voters that this is what we're going to fight for if you vote for me, a Democrat, in any district. And again, you need to tailor that message to your specific district, but I really don't know what the Democratic Party stands for right now. We had at the Democratic Convention, we invited more Republican speakers. They got about 30 minutes of speaking time, whereas AOC, a brand new star within the party, representative of the progressive wing, got 1 minute to speak. So I really don't think it's worth our time to chase after voters that fundamentally disagree with us on 70% of the issues that we're going to fight for. We need to work to expand our base and kind of secure our base, because we saw Donald Trump is now going to be the Republican nominee that received the most minority votes in the last 60 years. So the culture war kind of identity-ish focused messages are not an electable or winning strategy. And that's not to say that we don't fight for LGBTQ rights, that we don't fight for civil rights. It's just people need more of a policy. How are you going to improve their material condition? Along with, yes, we're going to fight for Black and brown people, and yes, we're going to fight for the LGBTQ plus community, but those issues cannot be the center of our campaign, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree with you. I think you're 100% correct. And I will add that these policies that you're proposing, the $15 minimum wage, decriminalizing drugs, these are popular policies. Like these are not niche, super left-wing, unpopular fringe ideas. These are popular policies across the boards for Democrats and Republicans. So I just find it extremely interesting that the opposition party can't come up with a message on winning policies like that. Like, you would think it would be easy for the Democrats to propose these issues that you can capture those people that they're supposedly, hounding so badly, the white working class that ended up going for Trump. You could win those people back and actually keep them because a lot of them were former Democrats. They were two-time Obama voters who switched to Trump. You can reclaim a lot of those people in a genuine way by proposing these popular policies that are popular across the board. So I think it's a little bit absurd that Democrats keep repeating the same strategy of trying to capture, Lincoln Project Never Trumpers, who, ironically enough, 93% of Republicans ended up supporting Trump this time around, which is an increase from last time.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that more Republicans went for Trump kind of is a complete indictment on the Lincoln Project and to the desire for Democrats to keep chasing these small minority suburban Republicans when they have a lot more people that are disengaged or don't trust the Democrats that they could actually be chasing after. So all that being said, I do want to acknowledge, like, there are some positives, as Emily alluded to earlier. The squad not only kept their seats, but also expanded with people like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman joining them. So it hasn't been all bad, but even though Democrats have kept the House currently and they don't look like they're going to capture the Senate, I want to talk about an hypothetical situation. Joe Biden is currently on track to win based on electoral votes. Now, anything can happen. I'm not saying definitively Joe Biden is going to win, but it just looks likely that he will. So given that, if we stop the counts right now and we just accept the results as they are, standing, Joe Biden is the president. Mitch McConnell still the Senate Majority Leader, and the House is now more even between Democrats and Republicans. In a hypothetical Joe Biden administration, can you see them actually reflecting on any of these issues and lessons that they've learned from this election cycle? And in terms of, if you're progressive minded, can you see Joe Biden even passing everything with them, a Senate majority still Republican? Can you see him getting anything done? What does the Joe Biden administration look like to you?
Joe Biden, the administration, if it comes to it, which is, like we said, it's probably going to happen given everything, the way everything is going right now. His biggest obstacle, I don't know if Thomas would agree, would be Mitch McConnell, the Senate, House leader. And he, when Obama was elected, made it his own personal mission to not let Obama have anything pass through. It was a miracle that, that the first time that Obamacare, as it's more popularly known as, didn't get, repealed, and that was thanks to senators like John McCain, but I think like you guys have mentioned before, they're trying so hard to work with like these like, they're trying to capture the super right again, and or like the centrist right, and like bring them back into the fold and be like, hey, like we can all like work together, I'm Joe Biden, we're about unity. And he has projected that message a lot, especially within the past few days. He's like, I'm not going to be a president of red or blue states. I'm going to be a president of the United States. And while I think, that's a very good way of framing it, because, the nation is so polarized, the nation is very divided, you know, the Democrats, like everyone has said before, needs to like, capture the imagination of their voter base. They need to expand it, especially like when Thomas said at the, Democratic convention, they gave much time to Republican speakers, and then AOC, who is arguably who is arguably becoming the best known Democrat out there, only got a minute. And even then they gave her a part that kind of, got hated on, because people thought that she was nominating Bernie Sanders. People didn't understand the intricacies of what was going on, and she had to clear it up herself, like, no, this isn't what is happening, blah blah blah, and so the Democratic Party, especially people like Nancy Pelosi, like Dianne Feinstein, who are very like, career Democrats, they need to realize that, people are changing. If you present someone with like a nonpartisan issues, like, hey, let's raise the minimum wage, let's get like a universal health care, they'll be like, yes, that's what we want, and trying to capture Mitch McConnell's like voter base, like you might get some, I'm not saying you won't, but to have Biden try to implement all that he's going to have without the Senate's backing, and then like the House now being more even, can he deliver on it? We'll have to see, because, maybe he can get everyone to work together again. But I think a lot of people, especially the younger people now, want something different. They've seen that it isn't working. A bunch of college students, I don't know about anyone here, but like a bunch of us are going into debt. A bunch of us aren't gonna be able to afford houses in the coming years. A bunch of us aren't going to be able to, get a bunch of things that our parents were able to get at our ages, because of the way things have been going. So they want something new, they want something fresh. And the fact that a bunch of young progressives have been elected to the House kind of shows that. So do I think the Biden administration can deliver on everything they promised? I don't think so. Especially with the Senate staying the way it is, I don't think so, but crazier things have happened.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna see a lot of change. I think Mitch McConnell is gonna act the same way that he did. And speaking to Emily's point, I think our best strategy forward is to pass his 100-day plans and everything that he's promised. Free college for people making under $125,000 a year, a public option, another stimulus package, because a lot of people still are hurting, extending unemployment, all of these extremely popular issues. And if Republicans are going to stand in the way of that, they'll suffer the consequences in the midterms. But we cannot abdicate our role trying to capture or appease Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins. It's not our job to. We understand that these issues are 80-20, 70-30 issues that a super majority of Americans support and desperately need in these times. And if they're going to stand in the way of that, they can suffer those consequences. And I think going back to kind of the electability argument is, I think that Joe Biden really needs to give credit where credit is due. Ilhan Omar, and as much as they don't like the squad, they didn't support them in their primaries. Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar turned out voters. Voters were excited to vote for them. They voted in historic numbers in Minneapolis and Detroit. For Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, we need to give credit where credit is due and understand that having progressives in these cities, without them, we wouldn't have turned out as many people as we needed to win Wisconsin or win Minnesota, to win Michigan. And I guess in the primaries, it was astounding to see Bernie win, not only, questionably win, Iowa, New Hampshire, and Nevada. And also he won Miami-Dade County in the primary. So we need to understand and accept there was no, it was just kind of after we beat the progressives, we don't need to talk to them, we don't need to speak to their issues anymore. We won and we're going to control the party platform. You need to understand, acknowledge, and implement progressive strategies and organizing that have proven successful to win elections. And the Democratic Party, I think, really needs to take into account its strategy with the so-called Latino bloc. We're talking about people from 37 different countries. None of this community is not monolithic, as we've seen in this election. What issues matter to the Cuban community are not going to be the issues that matter to indigenous Guatemala and Nicaraguan people. So we need to actually take time to understand our base and be able to turn them out next time, because right now it's just kind of stopping the bleeding that's happening in the packing of conservative justices within our federal judiciary. All of these weird executive orders ending policies and programs that have worked for decades, and kind of restore our standing within the world and repair relationships and alliances with our allies. So that's what Joe Biden can accomplish. And in the meantime, they really need to take into account what has worked and actually implement that. Because the progressive, just because we didn't win and have Bernie Sanders run, just because we only have 10 votes in the House, realistically, to pass a Green New Deal or whatever progressive policy you want to speak to, that doesn't mean that progressives shouldn't be a part of their electoral strategy. And people need to stop shunning and shaming them, because Bernie Sanders and AOC were the biggest supporters. They were out in the rural Midwest. Bernie was up in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, trying to convince voters to vote for Joe Biden. We did everything and poured everything that we could to elect Joe Biden, and they need to take this part of the party seriously because it's half of their coalition, if we want to see success in the future.
No, I agree. I think if Democrats want to win, that is something they're going to have to reflect on, and that's something they're actually going to have to reckon with, if whether or not they're going to continue the same strategy that hasn't won them an election since 2008. And even then, Obama didn't run as a moderate. He wasn't framed that way. He was coded as like a progressive. So if Democrats want to continue the same third way politics that haven't net them any success, I think they're going to be in trouble, especially when it comes to the midterms. But we'll come back to the Democrats. I want to move on to the Republicans and kind of pose a similar question. Let's say that, again, things hold as they stand and Donald Trump does, in fact, lose, and he is no longer the president. Do we see or do you guys see the Republican Party continuing Trumpism? This is something we posed to a guest earlier. Do you see the Republican Party internalizing and continuing Trumpism, or do you see them ditching, just as they ditch the individual Trump, do you see them ditching Trumpism and everything that's come with it along with him in the event that he loses?
Yeah, that's a difficult question to answer, because many times you have people like Mitt Romney, like Susan Collins, and they're more centrist Republicans. They were openly criticizing Trump for certain policies, but then when it came down to the Supreme Court nomination, they were all with passing that as fast as they could. So I think, I don't know if Thomas would agree with me or not, but I think it would be difficult to get rid of Trumpism if Biden does win, or if Trump they've ditched him, as you put it. I think it would be difficult because I think they've seen that they could get away with a lot. Things they probably didn't think were possible, they got away with. Policies they didn't think they could pass, pass. So I think it's going to be some time before we see the effects of Trump leave, if at all. But that's just how I see it, because the way things have been going with the Republican Party, it's kind of gone away from what they used to believe in, like family values and ideals. And this is probably going to sound very extreme, but it's kind of become like a party of white grievances. So like that's just how I view it. Again, That's my personal take. I'm not saying that is how it is, but that's just how I view it.
Which is totally fine.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to abandon Trumpism. I think Trumpism is the final form of what was their Southern strategy implemented by Nixon and Reagan to kind of hype up these fears, the xenophobia, the racism, as well as pairing that with an economic populist message, which I don't think they're authentic with, but people believe that they're authentic with for whatever reason. And I don't think Trump has captured 30% of the Republican base, or 90%. They said, okay, we're going to vote for Trump over Joe Biden, which is kind of an amorphous, we don't really understand what he is. They still said, I'm going to stick with Trump. So Trumpism is a fixture, and I think a foundation of what the Republican Party's brand is. I mean, going forward, they're going to try to expand that base. I think they're going to try to, again, tie all Democrats to socialism. But I don't think that that's going to be a winning message. Exit polls, and I just digging into the numbers, young people 18 to 29 went for Biden 80-20, I think it was. So their base of support is shrinking. Republicans care mostly about power and not governing or democracy. So they're going to do whatever they can to preserve that power because their base is so obsessed with sort of delivering, seeing someone else lose. That's what kind of their brand is to me in every single issue that you can go down the board. They want to see, like Madison Cawthorn, the youngest person to be elected to the House. His first tweet was, "Cry, libs, cry." Fundamentally, the Republican brand is seeing someone else lose or seeing someone else upset. And that's not a sustainable path forward, but I don't think it's going to change anytime soon because they enjoy and revel in kind of the oppression or just misfortune of other people. And that's not a winning strategy, I think, in America, especially with the coming economic crisis and as the pandemic persists.
Interesting. I happen to agree with you that Trumpism, I think the Republicans are going to be quick on a dime to abandon him. And I expect them to be able to drop Trump on a dime, but Trumpism is, I think, is a permanent fixture, like you said, of the Republican Party. I think it's forever going to be marked by him and what they want out of it, because I mean, they got everything they wanted. The judiciary is completely stacked with Republicans. They have a Supreme Court majority. As far as I think Republicans are concerned, at least leadership is, there's nothing else. Everything else is culture war because they've already won the war that matters to them, at least. So I think that Trumpism is going to be a permanent fixture, and it's going to be interesting seeing if the Democrats can adapt and counter that, because I agree with you in I think the general sense that I think if they Republicans just run on a spite-based politics of just wanting to purely indulge in culture war and owning the libs, as they say, I don't think that's a winning strategy. But if the Democrats don't counter that with anything meaningful and materially, I can actually see the Republicans winning on that message. So it'll be very interesting to see what their response is.
The success of the Republican platform is all going to depend on the response of the Democratic platform.
Mm-hmm.
Because the thing is what we've even talked about, Trump, I even said this earlier, like the people chose to vote for him. That's their decision and they made it. Like, you're not going to change their minds, in the same way that like the Republican platform has been fairly consistent. I'm sure there's a nuanced conversation to be had about the changes in the Republican platform over the last, however many decades back you want to go. But the Republican base and the Republican platform is fairly consistent, and it's not changing. So the Democrats' success is based purely on their response to it at this point. Because I think the big mistake, the biggest mistake that Democrats made in 2016 was giving Donald Trump enough rope that they thought he would eventually hang himself with it. That didn't happen. He was, he got as far as he did for a reason, and they didn't recognize that. I'm not saying he appeals to the whole country, but they didn't recognize his appeal to the people who support him. And if they want to win, they have to, and like I said, I'm not saying we need a Democratic Donald Trump. What we need is a Democrat who Democrats can get as excited about as Republicans get for Donald Trump. Because that's the thing, is you look at the Republican support. I don't think this is necessarily a controversial thing to say. Like, the Republican support for Donald Trump is much more intense than a lot of the Democratic support for Joe Biden, or even Clinton was. Because you talk to, you kind of talk about Joe Biden to anybody who's voting Democrat, and they always, you know, the statement inevitably gets said, like, look, he's not my first choice, but he's not Trump. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't our first choice. He wasn't our first. Well, why can't the Democrats get their first choice or even their second choice?
Yeah.
I think it's a matter, we need to stop playing their game and trying to pretend like trickle-down economics. This kind of corporatism that we see, socialism for the rich and rugged individualism for the poor. This is not a popular message. It's why Kansas had a Democratic governor in 2018. This message is fundamentally unpopular. The economics don't pan out, and they don't do anything to improve the material means of the working class. They just don't. And we need to seize on that and stop trying to meet Republicans where they're at with their rhetoric around economy. Because fundamentally, giving tax breaks to corporations and the very wealthy does not trickle down to everyday working people. And they can feel that. People can experience that. We're experiencing so much economic pain right now. And I think Democrats need to capitalize that. And I think, just speaking to one example, my home state, Washington, voted for Donald Trump 30%, Joe Biden 70%. It's a white state, which I think is kind of reflective of the nation. It's kind of a 70-30 split between a minority population and a white population. But we were able to win and expand our majorities in the state legislature, both in the House and the Senate, capture almost all 10 executive positions, because we're not afraid to be Democrat, which is fundamentally what it's about. Republicans in Washington state tried to trot out the same message that taxing is going to shrink the economy, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is going to kill small businesses. And when we actually pass these things and ask and demand better from our leaders in regards to how our economy is structured, people have seen and they can feel materially that their lives are improving with the Democrats' economic platform and message. And again, this is in a state with a regressive tax system, the most regressive in the nation, where the bottom 30% pay more in taxes than the most wealthy. But we're still winning because we aren't afraid to call out failed policies where we see them. And that's just kind of my 2 cents on actually how we're going to build progressive and sustainable coalitions of people to capture not only Washington and California and the West, all of these liberal cities, but also expand the Democrats' reach into the Midwest and the South.
No, I definitely hear you. And actually, on that note, I wanted to bring Emely back in because Thomas kind of laid out his vision for how, let's say, Biden becomes president, but it's still a gridlocked Senate and House. How, what is, for at least people that identify as progressive, what is the path forward? So I want to get your take, Emily. What do you feel like, if that is the scenario and that's the reality that we end up living in when everything is called, where do you see Democrats going from here? Where do you see progressives going from here? What is your vision for what they should do under this hypothetical situation of a Joe Biden presidency with a gridlocked House and Senate?
I mean, to look back on it, a perfect example of that would be Obama. I mean, in 2000, when he ran for his first term, I believe 2008, he was kind of like, a centrist Democrat. He ran as a centrist, got nominated. But as the years progressed, as he went into his second term, after re-election, he shifted to be more progressive. And, that made him very popular amongst younger people. You ask a lot of people and they're like, yeah, I miss Obama. He was cool, whatever. So I think the Democrats, especially people like Nancy Pelosi, I mentioned before, people like Dianne Feinstein here in California, they need to like realize that the way everything is shifting is towards progressives. There's a reason why AOC is so popular among younger people. There's a reason why, you know, people are rallying behind her and Bernie Sanders, because they hear the message and they see how passionate they are, and people will meet them back with that same passion. So the Democrats really need to realize that, you know, there is a shift coming and they need to brace themselves, you know, and accept that shift, because the way things are going, the way things have been, you know, no one wants to go back to the way things were. No one wants to be like, let's go back to normal. No, we want something better. You know, we want something that we can build upon, you know, we want something to leave behind that's actually sustainable. So for the Democrats to try to push this message of like, yeah, we just want to go back to the way things were, you know, we want to work with people, you know, blah, blah, blah. Like, you know, that is a, you know, a good message, you know, unity and stuff like that, but we can be united under a new message, under a new idea, something that's good and, you know, sustainable for everyone, not just for the few at the top. So like Thomas has mentioned before, you know, they really need to understand that there's a shift coming and that, you know, things aren't going and shouldn't go back to the way things were. Like Andrew mentioned before, you know, everyone, you know, who talks about Biden, they're like, even for myself, he wasn't my first choice. You know, I voted Bernie Sanders in the primary, and because I ultimately believed in everything Bernie stood for. I believed in everything, and while Biden has kind of adopted some, you know, more progressive policies that, you know, we're trying to appeal to the progressives, it just isn't enough, and I think a lot of people recognize that. So the Democrats really need to reorganize and look at themselves and to understand what is the path going forward.
No, I hear that.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
I think also we just need to. Emily brought up Dianne Feinstein, which kind of gave me a flashback to when she was hugging Lindsey Graham after the Amy Coney Barrett hearing finished. We don't need to see that. Dianne Feinstein is not defending a swing state of California. People don't care whether Dianne Feinstein or Lindsey Graham get along. Democrats need to actually fight for the progressive issues, especially our senators from Washington, California. They need to stand firm and understand that the Republicans are not here to play fair. They're not here to play by the rules. They're here to. So we need to be steadfast, and they've lost the benefit of the doubt, I think, for me and many other people. We need to at least have a spine and stand firm for these very basic issues that a majority of the country supports, like LGBTQ rights, a woman's right to choose. These aren't things we should be negotiating or kind of appealing to the other side's best angels about. Democrats need to be willing to fight for those issues, and people don't see fighters in Dianne Feinstein, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. They just don't. They don't believe that they're fighting for them. So I think while it's important to not let one politician become such a huge personality within the party, the Democrats need to have something. They need to make people believe that they're actually fighting for them or not going to roll over on every issue that comes to the table. Because we haven't seen any progress forward. We've only seen slightly less bad things happen to all of these marginalized communities when it comes to packing the cord. Passing a $2 trillion tax cut for the rich. All of these things are just slightly less bad versions of what Republicans would have put forward, and we need to demand more of our politicians. And even if they do lose those battles, the fact that they stood up and fought for something means a lot in motivating voters in the next election.
Yeah, no, I completely kind of speaking to that. Then let's talk about before we wrap things up soon. Let's talk about the coronavirus. Let's talk about the pandemic, which is kind of something we can't get away because we're still suffering from it. I wanted to ask you guys, one, what do you see kind of going forward? Do you see us getting out of this pandemic anytime soon? Do you see a potential Biden administration taking the reins of this and solving this crisis anytime soon?
I think personally, when the coronavirus hit, I think Biden kind of saw this as a gift, gifted it to him on a platter. He was like, this is his chance to show people, the incompetence that is Donald Trump. We have the highest, death in the entire world. We have the highest, people getting the virus and stuff like that. And we're supposed to be the best country in the world, and we're struggling. We're struggling. So coronavirus, if Biden, manages to, get the White House, which all odds are saying yes, he's probably going to make that his top priority because, it has affected, people's lives and, economically, socially, personally, or however, like for us, here we are, instead of seeing each other face to face, we're behind screens. We're not meeting on campus. We're not interacting with our professors anymore. So I think coronavirus has, given probably the edge that Biden really needed, in my personal opinion. Because without it, without the, fumbling of the Trump administration to handle the virus, then I don't think people would have been as, motivated, especially people on the right. That being said, do I think we're going to get out of it anytime soon? Undoubtedly. Very undoubtedly, which is very disappointing because, this is going to sound very, self-centered. I'm on the Model United Nation team, and, we worked so hard for a 2-month period to go to New York to speak at a conference that simulates the United Nation, general committees and stuff like that. And that was canceled a week before we even got to go because of coronavirus. It's looking like come April, we're not going to be able to go again, and that's because of the lack of seriousness that this current administration took the virus, So do I think we're going to get out of it anytime soon? No, especially with the rise of, anti-vaxxers, with people saying, it's going to be a chip and you're going to get chipped, Yeah. That's just how I see it. It's unfortunate, and, everyone wants to go back to normal, go out and, see their friends, go to the movie theaters, But I think it's also a lack of concern for other people that's also become into play. You have people saying, I don't want to wear a mask. I don't think it's I think it's dumb. I don't think it's going to do anything, blah, blah, blah. You have people here in California going out to parties, you have people here going to eat at restaurants, even though they're outside, but they're not socially distant, and, California is framed as this liberal safe haven when that isn't the case. There's still a lot of problems. There's still a lot of, us versus them mentality here. So yeah, that's just how I see things. Again, Thomas can speak more about it.
Yeah, and I guess it's been a disaster from our federal leadership, obviously. But I guess as a voter and someone just a resident living in California, I still have questions for our state leadership. Um, what I understood to be the point of quarantining for those first 3 months, really hardcore quarantine, where everything was shut down, it was takeout only, all these different things, was to ramp up testing. I go to a public university in California, we still aren't being tested, and I understand we're not on campus, but it still is unclear what the actual strategy to defeat the virus is and how effective that's going to be. And that uncertainty has fueled all these conspiracy theories that it's a pandemic and all this stuff, which I fundamentally don't believe. I believe in our medical leaders like Dr. Fauci and what all of the new information that's coming out. But we can't excuse the fact that we've chosen to adapt to the pandemic rather than actually defeat it. Making all these concessions, opening up restaurants for outdoor seating because one study told us that it's somewhat more safe. It literally does not make sense to me why, as soon as I enter a restaurant or a place that I can eat, now it's safe to take my mask off and eat in public. Those inconsistencies matter, and those inconsistencies allow room for the right and people that want to spread misinformation to further kind of take people away from what we should be focused on, which is coming together as a collective to end this pandemic, which other nations across the world have done. But I don't think all of these concessions to try to open up and kind of make it not as bad for our economy are not going to work in the long run. And I don't think it's sustainable or something we can do for 4 years. And speaking to the economics of the issue, we're not going to avoid an economic depression without guaranteeing workers' paychecks. We're not going to save the hotel industry. We're not going to save the airline industry. We're not going to save any of these failing industries or the thousands of workers, hundreds of thousands of workers that depend on those industries without guaranteeing first workers' checks. We asked people to survive for 6 months on $2,000 stimulus check. We failed to extend unemployment, which in a lot of cases was more money than people were making at their full-time jobs, which speaks to the issues economically of our wage system. But I think to get out of this, we need to have a clear, concise, I understand that it's a new issue, that we can't entirely, it's out of our control, and it's kind of uncertain. We have more certainty from our leaders and when this is actually going to be over and what our actions are tangibly contributing to ending this pandemic. And in the meantime, the federal government, our state government needs to cancel rents for all people, and they need to provide kind of guarantee workers' paychecks and not just give money to corporations to kind of get out of this pandemic, because so many of them focused on the last 3 years buying back their stocks, and now they have no money. And why are they going to come to us and say, oh, I need more money because it's a pandemic now? Yes, it's a pandemic now, but you should have anticipated something like this. And we should be focused entirely on securing workers' economic security before we bail out corporations, which unfortunately is what I've seen to be both Democrats and Republicans' focus right now, is passing bailouts for all these specific industries without worker protections guaranteed in them and without passing another stimulus, which needs to continue until this pandemic is over for us to actually recover.
Yeah, I agree full-heartedly. The fact that it's been how many months we're into this pandemic and we've only gotten one check for 1,200, that's not even that's not even how much people make in a month, especially those who have full-time jobs. So it's kind of a joke, especially given everything we've seen, and this whole trickle down economics. It's been proven not to work, and what keeps the economy going? We've seen people keep the economy going. If we don't have the trust, the people don't have the money, they're not going to buy. So it just goes to show that there are problems that are deeply rooted, and they're probably not going to be fixed anytime soon, as disappointing as that is, So hopefully, change does come, and I think, people mobilizing and, you've seen the progress that, mass protests can have, especially on people kind of willing to listen to the majority of society. But like I said, we'll have to see how everything goes.
No, I completely agree. I think I want to end this on a positive note because, especially with Dr. Guerrero, when we spoke to him, I admitted to my cynicism, and he was like, "Look, we got to be positive." And I'm like, "I hear you. We got to be hopeful." So I'm gonna try to bring this back around to a more positive note. That being said, I think it's important that we acknowledge reality. I don't think what we should be doing, regardless of really where you fall on the aisle, just talking in general, people should not accept the false notions that politicians are squeaky clean, that these parties actually have our best interests in heart. They don't. The current form of either party they're captured by corporate interest. They do not represent people. They especially do not represent working class people. And just like you have said, Emily, Trickle down economics has been fully rejected. They've given us the equivalent of $5 a day to survive on this pandemic. This is on both parties, and there's been no follow up. There has been no legislation passed that's helped alleviate people across the board. People are suffering, and they're going to continue to suffer unless something changes. So I completely agree with you. I think we need to acknowledge the faults in both parties, whether which one you align with doesn't really matter. Just acknowledge the faults in both of them and recognize that we're going to need real material change for people, for working people specifically, if we're going to get out of this for the entire country. And I would say that hope is possible. Like you said, Emily, when people organize, when people mobilize, it is possible. The energy is there. What it comes down to, in my view, is that whether or not the parties capture that energy and they recognize and utilize that. There's a lot of criticism people can make about with the different protests that we've had, whether or not that's actually resulted in anything materially, like any actual policy change. And what I would say that is I completely hear that criticism. I agree with you, but there was a period where the American people had overwhelming support for reform when it came to policing. There were the largest protests in the U.S. history out in the streets. So bodies were in the streets, mobilized, all calling for a overwhelmingly popular policy change, some kind of change. And it just came down to parties failing to do anything about that. So what I think as a hopeful message is that we need to keep that energy up, push for these policies, and then hopefully we have new politicians or old ones that recognize that when that energy, when those sparks happen, they light a fire and we're able to carry that torch on to something better, hopefully.
Yeah, to kind of add on, don't don't feel so, I don't want people to feel like there isn't change, that nothing can be done. Things can be done, and we saw that over the course of the summer. Things can be done, and it just has to start at the individual level. You inspire others, you show people what it is that can be done. So the more you build your movement, the more people will rally behind you, especially if it's something you're very passionate about. So I like to pride myself on being very optimistic. I think change can and will happen one day. So I think it's going to happen within the next 2 years. Probably not. Do I think Biden's going to deliver on everything he promised, given the way things are going? Probably not. But I think that, people are starting to understand that, change is coming. Whether it's not happening fast enough, it is disappointing. Change is going to be here one day. And, you have to be part of that willingness to accept that, and then, push for it anyways, push through the disappointment of everything and still try to fight for that change. So I don't want people to think like they can't make a difference. They can make a difference. Your votes can make a difference. Your voice can make a difference. Don't ever feel like you're alone, because you're not.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
And I totally agree with everything Emily just said. And we have had tangible policy wins when it comes to defunding police with Measure J in Los Angeles. In Washington State and Seattle, we reasserted democratic power over police conduct and their budget. So these things do translate into meaningful policy victories, but we need to keep that pressure up, because as soon as it dissipates, as soon as that pressure isn't there for especially Democratic politicians, but also Republican politicians, to deliver aid to workers to fight for actual working class people, they're not going to. That's the status quo. Like Nick mentioned, they are not working, and they're not concerned with what I would describe as a majority of people, working class people. But you need to make your voice heard. You need to organize and make your presence known, to be able to build that pressure to actually make a change, which has happened. This isn't a complete disaster at all. We've made state wins at the state level, at the local level, when it comes to progressive policies like minimum wage increases, reining in police power, and all these other issues. It can be done, but it needs to start at the grassroots level. And the grassroots are made up of each and every single one of us, which includes you. So I think that, just like Emily said, we can't lose hope in this fight, because we have made tangible strides forward. Even though everything didn't turn out exactly how we had wished, we need to fight for our highest ideals if we want to make progress at all. And we can't ever give up in that fight if we want to see progress continue to happen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And like, not to forget that the politicians work for you. You don't work for them.
Absolutely. And like Dr. Guerrero said, like we don't got any options other than hope. You got to be hopeful. And just as I told him, the only way forward is together. And we have to just always keep that in mind, that if we don't come together, if we don't keep the pressure up, and like you said, Emily, remind them who put them there, who put them in their position, who is paying their bills. All right. We are their boss. The public is their boss. And I think if anything, for left or right, I think people in this country need to remember that, and need to kind of come to terms with the power that we have collectively as a people to whip them into getting policies that we want done. Andy, is there anything else you want to add, man?
No, I just want to say that I think ending on a hopeful note is a great way to wrap this up. At the end of the day, we're having this conversation because we live in a country where we're allowed to have this conversation because we are able to vote and make our voices heard. So the fact that we were able to go out and do that on Tuesday is, we can always start there, and that's always a hopeful thing, that we are able to make our voices heard. So, yeah, I mean, as disillusioned as a lot of us are, you got to remember that we all still have voices, and we can still make them heard.
Absolutely. And with that, Broncos, I think we're going to wrap up the final segment of our election special. Emely Vanegas, Thomas Swanson, I want to thank you guys so much, so much again for joining us on this follow-up episode and this post-election analysis. You guys have been amazing. This has been a wonderful and fruitful discussion. I feel like a very rich discussion, and we are more than honored to have you guys back on.
Thank you for having us on behalf of the Political Science Club and the department. We're happy to be here, happy to, give whatever, whatever expertise we could provide, we're happy to do it.
And that you did. You guys gave us a lot to work with. I feel like this has been an amazing dialogue, and I hope people enjoyed it as much as I have. And with that, Broncos, we're going to go ahead and wrap up this lengthy election episode. We hope all of you take care. Remember everything we said. Stay hopeful, stay positive, and whatever's going to happen in the fallout of this election, just remember the only way forward is together. So with that, Broncos, we're going to catch you on the next one.